not because he was incapable. Far from it. Eyes like storm clouds, a body built from silent discipline, and an empire inherited before most men finished college. But behind the polished exterior lived a truth he refused to offer anyone. He'd never had sex. Never once. He'd dated models, for appearances, dined with royalty, for diplomacy, but never once had he let anyone touch the core of him. Because love was messy, love was irrational, and Martins believed deeply in one thing: control. Hello, my beautiful Love and Twilight family. This is Dr. Phillips, with a gentle reminder: don't just watch, be part of this journey. If this story has touched your heart, please hit that like button, because every like helps us share hope, love, and healing with more people who truly need it. I'd love to hear from you, so drop your thoughts in the comments. Your words mean more than you know. And if you haven't yet, subscribe and join our growing family. Now, let's continue this amazing story together. His father, Jean Delacroix, had once warned him in the corner of a cigar-scented study: the moment you fall in love, you give up the seat of power. And power, son, once given, never returns. So Martins built walls, routines, and rules. He perfected solitude until it looked like sophistication. He made loneliness look like luxury. His days were military clean. Wake at 5. Cold shower. Cucumber water. Portfolio review. Morning floor walk. Spa steam. Private violin session. No questions. No deviation. His assistants knew better than to speak unless spoken to. Every staff member on the penthouse level walked softer, and yet, for all the grandeur, he never smiled. Not really. In meetings, his tone was clipped. His words, razor sharp. In photos, his face remained marble. Reporters speculated. Was he hiding something? Gay? Broken-hearted? Emotionally stunted? The truth was worse. He was terrified. Terrified of what would happen if someone cracked through his precision. If someone touched the parts of him that weren't rehearsed, refined, or protected. The parts of him that still remembered being a 7-year-old boy hiding behind a curtain, while his parents threw vases at each other, shouting about betrayal and image and shame. He didn't want that fate. Not ever. So he chose silence, control, distance, until the universe, ever cruel, ever poetic, sent him someone who folded towels like they were sacred scrolls and smelled faintly of lemongrass. But we'll get there. First, we must watch Martins on the morning. Everything began to shift. He stood before the penthouse glass, espresso untouched, eyes scanning a city too loud for his liking. He had a shareholders' call in 15 minutes, but his mind was elsewhere. He'd noticed a scent lingering in the air, soft, floral, unfamiliar. Jasmine. He hadn't approved a change in oils. Martins turned sharply. Antonia, he called into the air. His AI-powered assistant responded, "Yes, Mr. Delacroix?" Who adjusted the aromatics in the suite. No service was recorded beyond the usual housekeeping rotation. "Would you like to review security footage?" He hesitated, then declined. It was the first time he didn't investigate something that wasn't as it should be. The scent lingered. The next morning, there was a folded towel shaped like a swan on his spa bed. Decorative folding wasn't standard at the Delacroix Grand. That was for cheaper brands, not legacies. Martins frowned. By the 5th morning, he waited. Deliberately scheduled his routine to overlap with the shift. He didn't admit it, not even to himself. But he was curious. Then he saw her. Through a half-open door, crouched low near the floor-to-ceiling atrium. Garden, Paisley was whispering something to a potted mint plant. He should have been alarmed. Called for security, ordered her removed. Instead, he stood frozen. She moved like silence, light on her feet, hair pulled into a modest braid, skin glowing without makeup. She had on the standard gray housekeeping uniform, but nothing about her felt standard. She watered the mint gently, then bowed her head as if in prayer. He forgot to breathe. She turned. He disappeared. Later that night, he couldn't sleep. For the first time in years, the penthouse felt occupied. It wasn't the girl. It was her presence. Quiet, intentional, like she carried something more than a mop and bucket. Like she believed in something deeper than marble floors and mirrored elevators. Martin stared at the ceiling, replaying the way her hands cupped the plant, the way she didn't rush, didn't flinch. He closed his eyes and saw her again. Stillness, but not loneliness. And something cracked, just a little. The next morning, Martins moved the executive meeting back an hour. No one questioned it. Downstairs, Paisley arrived for her shift, unaware the man she'd accidentally seen through the sheer drapes 2 days ago had been watching, unaware that her folded towel, the one shaped like a swan, had rewritten an empire's schedule, unaware that the man behind the glass had just taken his first unpredictable step in 40 years. Martins Delacroix lived at the top, in every sense of the word. His penthouse wasn't just a home, it was a calculated sculpture, neutral tones, custom furnishings, no clutter, no softness, every angle intentional, every object an extension of power and discipline. A piano sat near the edge of the glass overlooking Manhattan, but he hadn't played it in years. A single orchid bloomed by the spa atrium, only because Paisley had whispered to it. And every shelf carried books he never read but arranged according to spine color and author's last name. Order, always order, yet behind the glass walls that framed the skyline like a permanent portrait. Something stirred in him lately, a restlessness he couldn't define. The scent of jasmine still lingered in the corners of his thoughts. The girl's face kept appearing in his mind uninvited. He hated unpredictability, but more than that, he feared feeling. Martins didn't have friends. He had staff, colleagues, subordinates. His phone never rang unless filtered through his assistant. He hadn't been hugged since his mother's funeral 15 years ago. And even then, it felt like a goodbye more than an embrace. He kept people outside the glass. Not just metaphorically, literally. The penthouse had no guest rooms, no second toothbrush, no shared couch, no duplicate wine glass. He had crafted a world for one, a fortress disguised as a luxury suite. Even his meals were solitary. Breakfast at the bar, protein smoothie, boiled egg, 2 almonds. Lunch, microgreens, grilled fish, lemon. Dinner, skipped, not because he was busy, but because hunger was a reminder that he still needed something, even if just physically. And Martins hated needing anything. Until her. She didn't storm in. She didn't smile brightly or flirt clumsily like others before. She entered with reverence, like the suite mattered, like someone had taught her to respect space. And he noticed. The first time she left the towels triple-folded, sharp and elegant. He raised an eyebrow. The second time, she adjusted the placement of the diffusers, aligning them in a symmetrical triangle. By the third time, she had begun leaving behind traces, not of perfume but of presence. He felt it in the silence. The air shifted after her. She didn't clean like someone following instructions. She cleaned like someone restoring sacred ground. Martins watched through security footage that night, unable to sleep again. She knelt by the corner spa lamp, wiped it twice, then paused. Her lips moved in a whisper. He replayed that 5-second clip over and over. She didn't even know he had seen her. That unnerved him more than if she had tried to seduce him. In the corporate wing, the executive team whispered, "Is he losing focus?" He missed the Zurich call. He hasn't approved the Shanghai expansion budget. Martins heard every whisper, and ignored them all. He hadn't lost focus. He'd found it, or at least, found something that interrupted the monotony he'd been calling a legacy. He opened the penthouse journal he hadn't written in for years. The first line, "She speaks to the plants." He tapped the pen twice, stared at the page, then wrote another line, "She doesn't look afraid." Downstairs, Paisley kept her head low. She didn't want to make friends with the other maids. She wasn't here to climb ladders or seek attention. She wanted enough hours to pay for her online wellness certification. She wanted to save enough to help her mother rebuild the family porch back home. But Martins lingered in her head like a rhythm she couldn't shake. She'd seen him once, shirtless, damp. The steam had clung to his skin as if jealous of her eyes. She should have looked away. She didn't. And now, she couldn't stop thinking about him. She didn't know his story, only the rumors. That he never touched anyone. That he was cold. That he lived in the sky and didn't come down unless the world begged him. But she didn't believe that. Not fully. Because no one who kept plants alive with such care could be soulless, and no man who didn't care would pause mid-meeting to glance at a towel fold. He had noticed. She knew it. She just didn't know why that made her heart beat differently now. Martins sat in his spa lounge, robe loosely tied, staring into the steam. He thought about control, about how everything in his life had been curated, carved, defined. Then this girl, this maid with a braid and whispers for plants, had walked in and rearranged his hair without even trying. That was dangerous. That was impossible to ignore. He stood up abruptly. "Antonia," he called to the voice assistant. "Yes, Mr. Delacroix. Who is assigned to housekeeping on the penthouse level this month?" One moment, housekeeping staff rotation, primary, Paisley Laurent, secondary, none assigned. He inhaled sharply. Paisley Laurent. The name tasted like chamomile and jasmine. He closed his eyes. She'd return tomorrow morning, and for the first time in 40 years, Martins Delacroix planned to break his routine on purpose. "You folded the sheets differently today." Those were the first words Martins Delacroix spoke directly to Paisley. He hadn't meant to speak at all. He was supposed to be downstairs. His assistant had scheduled a breakfast with a real estate magnate visiting from Dubai. But Martins canceled the meeting without warning, climbed the stairs, and waited quietly behind the spa doorway. When she walked in with her cleaning cart, humming a soft melody he didn't recognize, his world tilted. The humming stopped when she spotted him. Her eyes widened. Her hands froze mid-motion over a linen sheet. I'm sorry. I didn't know anyone was in," she said quickly. "You folded the sheets differently," he repeated. "I can put them back," she offered, nerves suddenly wrapping her voice. "No." He stepped forward. "I like it too much." The silence stretched, heavy but not uncomfortable. She nodded and turned back to work. But Martins didn't move. He stayed, watched, listened. Her presence didn't make the space feel crowded. It made it feel real. Later that day, in the staff kitchen on the 16th floor, the whispers started. "Did you hear?" She spoke to him. "To Martins?" "Swear on my paycheck. Caught them in the same room. Talking. No one talks to him. Not unless he talks first. She's new, right? The countryside girl. Guess he noticed more than her cleaning." Paisley overheard every word. She didn't respond, didn't correct them. But inside, her stomach coiled with questions. Why had he stayed? Why did he seem interested? Was it admiration or amusement? She tried to convince herself it didn't matter. Her job was temporary. Her goals were clear. And yet, she had dreamt of him again last night. This time, he touched her wrist. Nothing more, but the way she woke up gasping. It felt like her entire world had changed. Martin sat in his private boardroom later that afternoon, while 5 department heads droned on about quarterly margins. He couldn't focus. He didn't hear the numbers or projections. Didn't care about the graphs. He kept thinking about the moment her eyes met his. How they didn't drop. How they didn't widen with awe or greed. Just calm awareness. She saw him, not the heir, not the billionaire. Him. That scared him more than the board's reaction to missed meetings. Because she wasn't supposed to matter. No one was. He opened his phone and tapped into the staff database. Name, Paisley Laurent. Age, 26. Assigned department, housekeeping, VIP suite. Start. Date, 2.5 months ago. Performance reviews, consistently above standard. Quiet. Punctual. No incidents. He stared at the screen for minutes before closing it. Then reopened it. Then closed it again. Martins had no idea what he was doing. But something about her tugged at a thread he'd buried years ago. He remembered being 12, sitting on the steps of his family's villa in Nice, watching a maid named Colette hand-feed birds in the garden. His father had berated her for being too soft. Colette disappeared the next day. Now, decades later, a woman with gentle fingers and jasmine oil was folding her way into his thoughts, and Martins didn't know how to silence it. In a closed-door meeting the next morning, the whispers found the executive suite. Martins is distracted. He's spending more time upstairs, alone. He postponed a merger call yesterday. He's never missed a single one. His godfather, Dominic Beaumont, former chairman and still a heavy influence, on the board, adjusted his gold cufflinks and leaned forward. "Keep an eye on him," he said simply. "Delacroix men fall hard, and when they do, empires shake." Back on the 72nd floor, Martins walked through his penthouse and paused by the towels. Another swan. This time, it was smaller, more detailed. Curved in a different posture, head dipped low, like a bow. He ran a hand over it gently. It wasn't about towels. It was her way of speaking. She didn't send notes. She didn't knock on his door. She didn't make noise. She communicated through care. Martins walked to his closet, pulled out a blazer, and tossed it carelessly on the lounge chair. Then he paused, turned back, smoothed the wrinkles, because if she was going to be folding his world into something beautiful, the least he could do was give her something worthy of being touched. Down in her dorm room, Paisley sat cross-legged on the bed, brushing conditioner through her hair. Her roommate, Tasha, leaned against the closet door, arms folded. "You know they're talking about you, right?" Paisley didn't answer. "They say he's obsessed, that he changed his schedule." Paisley kept brushing. "You gonna flirt your way to the top, is that it?" "No," Paisley said softly. "I'm just cleaning," Tasha scoffed. "Sure. With origami towels and prayers over plants?" Paisley met her eyes. "If someone notices the way I treat a space, that's not seduction, that's recognition." Tasha rolled her eyes and walked out. Paisley closed her eyes, trying not to let doubt enter. But something inside her already knew this wasn't ordinary anymore. That evening, as the city turned orange and gold, Martin stood in the garden atrium, sipping tea. She would return tomorrow, and he had no idea what he was supposed to do with everything he was beginning to feel. He only knew this. For the first time in his life, he was no longer at the center of his thoughts. She was, and that was more powerful than any empire he'd ever built. Paisley Laurent arrived in New York with 2 suitcases, a passport that still smelled like fresh ink, and a dream held together by prayers. The job at the Delacroix Grand had come through a cousin's friend who had moved to the city years ago. "It's just cleaning," they said. "Not glamorous, but it pays. You won't see the boss. He lives in the clouds." She didn't plan to stay long. Just enough to save. Just enough to breathe. Just enough to put herself through the wellness certification she couldn't afford back home. Someday, she'd open a studio, small, bright, filled with candles and calm. But New York wasn't what she expected. It was louder, colder, faster. No one looked anyone in the eye, except when she stepped into that elevator to the 72nd floor for the first time. Then, everything slowed. The penthouse level was a world apart. Silence hummed like a song. The carpets absorbed sound. The air smelled expensive, not just clean but curated. Fresh eucalyptus, mint, linen. The first time she entered Martin's Delacroix suite, she thought she'd made a mistake. It was too quiet, too sacred. She whispered "excuse me" to no one, set her bucket down gently, and began wiping surfaces like they might bruise. Everything was in place, unnervingly so. Not a speck of dust, not a fingerprint. It looked like a photo, not a home. But then she found the plants. Real ones. Dozens of them, tucked along the glass edge of the spa lounge. A miniature garden breathing life into the coldness. She paused. Her fingers grazed a basil leaf. It was soft, thriving. No one who lived among thriving herbs was entirely empty. She smiled and whispered to the plant, "You're doing great. Keep growing." She didn't know he had cameras. She didn't know he would watch. She just did what her mother taught her. Respect the space, speak kindness, and never leave a room the way you found it. The job was simple. Clean the penthouse twice a week. Never linger. Never ask questions. Never take anything. But Paisley did things differently. Not to impress, to offer honor. She lined the soaps symmetrically. She added lavender drops to the sheets on full moon nights. She never moved anything that felt personal, but she folded everything with intention, even the towels, especially the towels. She'd learned from her grandmother, the old way, with firm hands and patient grace. Towels were symbols of welcome. You didn't just toss them, you shaped them. So she did. First time, a swan. Second time, a heart. Third time, a lotus flower. She never expected anyone to notice, but he did. 3 weeks in, she caught her first glimpse of him, not directly, but through the sheer curtain in the spa room. She was cleaning the glass wall when she noticed movement beyond the veil. He stood near the piano, barefoot, shirtless, hair damp from the steam. She froze, muscles sculpted from years of restraint, back turned to her, unaware. She stared longer than she should have. Her hands stilled. She wasn't ogling. It felt like watching a statue breathe, and yet it stirred something dangerous inside her. That night, her dreams played music she'd never heard before, slow, haunting strings and soft rainfall. She dreamt of glass towers and forbidden touches, of a man who had everything but warmth. She woke up sweating. Paisley never told anyone about the dream, but the next time she entered his suite, she found a button missing on his cuff. Just one. She placed it in a velvet pouch and left it on the nightstand. The time after that, she noticed his sandals were too close to the steam vent. She moved them gently. No one would have noticed, but she did. It wasn't that she was trying to get close. It was that she couldn't help but care, and caring in a world like this was dangerous. Martins noticed. Of course he did. The linen folds had a different rhythm now. The scent by the bedside changed. Someone was seeing him without being seen. It unnerved him, but it also made him wait for her next shift. He began to wake up earlier on her days, walk slower through the spa hallway, pause near the plants pretending to inspect them, just long enough to cross her path. She didn't speak, didn't intrude, but one day he found a tiny slip of paper tucked under the basil pot, written in small, careful handwriting. "Your garden is peaceful. Thank you for letting it grow." He kept that paper in his inner suit pocket for weeks. Didn't tell anyone, didn't ask why she wrote it, but he began rescheduling meetings. Not many, just enough, just to be around. When she walked in, downstairs, Paisley received her new schedule, more hours, still only cleaning the penthouse. She thought it was a mistake. It wasn't. He had requested it himself. She didn't know that yet, but something in her chest fluttered as she cleaned the next time. Her movements became slower, her breathing more intentional, because now she knew. He saw, and something had shifted between the glass and the girl who dared to fold towels like love notes. Paisley didn't expect to dream of him again, but she did. This time she wasn't watching him from behind the curtain. She was standing beside him, barefoot, her hand in his, as if she belonged in the clouds. No words, just warmth. In the dream, he wasn't the billionaire, the empire builder, the man people whispered about. He was just Martins, and she was just Paisley, a girl who folded things with care and believed in stillness. She woke up with a strange ache in her chest, and a realization she didn't want to admit. He had entered her spirit like steam, soft, silent, and impossible to catch. That morning, she walked into the penthouse suite differently, not with confidence, but with awareness. His scent still lingered faintly in the room, subtle spice and cedar wood. She wondered if he had walked through this hallway barefoot last night. She shook her head. "Focus," she muttered. She had a cart to unload, a floor to mop, a suite to care for, but her fingers moved slower than usual. She found herself adjusting the throw on the sofa twice, then 3 times. She paused by the glass windows, letting her eyes fall over the skyline. Then to the reflection of the orchid pots she'd rearranged last week. She'd left a note beneath the basil plant days ago. It was gone now, which meant he'd found it. He hadn't mentioned it. Of course not. She knew. She felt it in the air, like electricity before rain. Martins watched the camera feed again. She was careful, gentle. The way she moved through his space made him feel something foreign. Trust. Not because she obeyed, but because she didn't try to manipulate anything. She didn't speak loudly, didn't perform. She didn't even seem to know she was being observed. She just existed. And for a man who had calculated every inch of his life, that kind of presence was dangerous. And magnetic. He had replayed the moment he saw her through the spa window more times than he'd admit. How her hand had lingered on the glass. How her breath fogged the surface slightly. How she didn't know he was watching from the other side. He remembered every detail of that first dream-to-like encounter. But what haunted him more was her letter. Just one line. Simple. Yet it sat heavier in his chest than any boardroom argument he'd ever endured. "Your garden is peaceful. Thank you for letting it grow." Letting it grow. He hadn't let anything grow in years. Not relationships. Not warmth. Not softness. But with her, things were blooming again. Paisley wasn't foolish. She knew her place. He was wealth. She was a worker. He was marble. She was linoleum. They weren't supposed to overlap, but she also wasn't blind. She had seen his eyes the last time they met, quiet but restless. She felt the space around her pulse when he was nearby, like even the walls noticed, and she wasn't imagining the way he lingered when she worked, the way he never interrupted but never left either. It was like he was waiting to understand something, about her, or maybe about himself. Later that evening, Paisley stood in the employee dorm kitchen stirring chamomile tea. One of the other maids, Maria, leaned across the counter. "So, what's it like up there?" "Up where?" Maria rolled her eyes. "The penthouse, where the boss lives." Paisley stirred slowly. "Clean. Quiet. Does he talk to you?" Paisley hesitated. "Sometimes." Maria raised an eyebrow. "He ever smile?" "Not yet." "Well, if he ever does," Maria said, smirking, "write it down. Might be the first in history." Paisley offered a half smile, but her heart was somewhere else. She knew Martin's had more inside him than silence. She had seen it in the way he paused by the garden, the way his fingers brushed the leaves, almost apologetically, the way he let her towel creatures remain. She wondered if he dreamt of her too. The next morning, Martins did something irrational. He told his assistant to cancel the Zurich call. He didn't explain. He didn't offer a reason. He simply walked to the edge of his atrium, watered the basil plant himself, and waited. She arrived 5 minutes later. The door opened. Her cart rolled in. She didn't see him at first. She was focused, calm. Then she looked up. Their eyes met. Neither of them spoke. Not yet. But something passed between them that didn't need language. Recognition. Respect. A quiet, undeniable pull. He offered her a nod and stepped aside. And as she passed, her fingers brushed the edge of his towel cart, the same way her dreams had touched him for nights. Soft, unassuming, but unforgettable. That night, he played the piano for the first time in 8 years. The notes were uneven, rusted, but the melody was familiar, like the dream. And outside the glass, the city blinked, but for the first time, Martins didn't feel like he was alone in the sky. Paisley didn't know what changed. She only felt it. It was in the pauses, longer now, when he walked past her. It was in the way he no longer avoided eye contact but allowed it to linger. It was subtle, unspoken. But the shift was real. The cage wasn't made of metal or rules. It was made of silence and ritual. Martins had built it himself, and now she was wiping its walls with careful hands, not realizing. Each movement peeled away a layer of what had once held him in place. She arrived early that morning. Her shift wasn't scheduled to start until 7, but something had pulled her out of bed at 5. A strange sense of anticipation, like she was being summoned by something she couldn't name. The elevator to the penthouse hummed its usual tune. The carpet on the 72nd floor felt softer than usual. The hallway, warmer. She slid the master keycard through the sensor. The light turned green. Inside, the suite was dim, bathed in early light. But she wasn't alone. Martin stood near the atrium, barefoot again, holding a small watering can. The basil plant sat in front of him, damp and healthy. He didn't turn around. Paisley froze. "I didn't expect you to be here yet," she said softly. "I didn't expect to enjoy watering plants," he replied. She smiled. He finally turned. His hair was slightly tousled. His robe hung loosely over a dark shirt. For the first time, she saw him not as a figure, but as a man. Real, human, vulnerable. Martins hadn't slept, not because of stress or meetings. He hadn't slept because her presence haunted the walls like perfume after a storm. He had watched the security feed again, not for surveillance, but for comfort. The way she folded things, how she whispered as she worked, how her touch was never rushed. It calmed him. He realized with a jolt that no one had ever calmed him before. Not lovers, not family, not even solitude. Only her. And now she stood there, with her braid tucked over one shoulder, lips slightly parted in surprise. He didn't want her to leave. "Would you like some tea?" he asked. She blinked. "Are you offering?" "I'm asking." She hesitated, then nodded. He gestured toward the bar. She followed. They didn't talk much as the kettle boiled. The silence wasn't awkward. It was sacred. She took her tea without sugar, just lemon. He remembered that from the pantry log she once filled out. He served it in a ceramic mug, no gold rim, no brand stamp, just plain, warm pottery. "Do you always work like this?" he asked. "Like what?" "With care." Paisley tilted her head. "Shouldn't I? Most don't notice." He paused. "I notice." Their eyes locked. The steam from her cup danced between them. After tea, she returned to cleaning. He didn't leave. He watched. He didn't direct, didn't instruct, just observed. She dusted the sculpture on the entry table, smoothed the pillow creases, replaced the eucalyptus in the diffuser with fresh drops of neroli. Martins leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You move like you own the space," he said. She glanced back. "I respect the space." "What's the difference?" "Ownership is control. Respect is care." He didn't speak after that, but he smiled, barely, just a flicker, and she saw it. Her heart stuttered. Downstairs, the staff gossip swelled. "Did you hear? She drank tea with him. In his suite? Girl's not even wearing lip gloss. She must have done something. He hasn't looked this alive in years. Bet she's playing some long game." But Paisley didn't play games. She didn't even know how. Her moves weren't calculated. They were instinct. And if anyone thought she was seducing him, they didn't understand what it meant to simply see someone and choose kindness anyway. Martin stood at his window that evening, hands in his pockets, looking out at the blurred city. His reflection stared back at him. For years, he'd avoided mirrors unless necessary. He hated what he saw. Not the features, those were passable, but the hollowness in his eyes, the isolation in his jawline. Now, there was something different, a flicker of light, a softness around the edges. He touched the glass, then dropped his hand. He thought about her fingers brushing that same surface weeks ago. For the first time, he imagined what it might feel like to be touched without breaking. That night, she left a towel shaped like a butterfly on his spa bed. He didn't touch it for hours. He just stood there, staring, and wondering how a folded towel could make him feel more than any woman had in 40 years. The fifth time Martin saw her, everything changed. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was need. It was a thread pulling tighter each time she entered the room. He didn't know when he had started watching her this intently. When her silence became a language he couldn't stop learning. But on that morning, something cracked open. He had rearranged his schedule again. Another board meeting pushed. Another interview declined. His assistant didn't question it anymore. She simply nodded and adjusted his calendar, eyes carefully neutral. Martin sat in the spa atrium, pretending to read a dossier about a new hotel venture in Prague. He wasn't reading. He was listening. For footsteps, soft ones. At precisely 7:14 a.m., they came. Her knock was gentle as always. Her entry smooth, unassuming. She didn't know he was already seated on the chaise by the window. She didn't look for him. She simply began her routine, humming under her breath. Not a tune he recognized. Something soft, almost like a lullaby. Martins watched her from the corner of his eye. Her braid was tucked over her shoulder today. A few strands had come loose. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, just the gray uniform that somehow looked too humble for the grace she carried. Then she paused and turned. Their eyes locked. She blinked once, then gave him a small nod. Not startled, not apologetic, just present. "I didn't realize you were in," she said, her voice even. "I wanted to be." She tilted her head. "Should I come back?" "No," he said quickly. Too quickly. He cleared his throat. "Stay." She nodded again. "Okay." Paisley returned to folding a fresh set of linens on the edge of the spa bench. Martins watched, entranced. "You folded the sheets differently today," he said. She glanced over her shoulder. "Do you not like it?" "No." He stood slowly. "I like it too much." That made her pause. She didn't blush, didn't giggle. She simply looked at him and waited. "You do things with intention," he continued. "So do you," she replied. "That's why your world is so quiet." He stepped closer. She didn't move. "I've built a life around silence," he said. "Maybe that's why you notice small sounds, like her humming, her steps, her breath." He was close now, too close. She held the towel gently between her fingers, but didn't continue folding. He looked down at it. "A swan?" he asked. She shook her head. "Too obvious. What is it?" "A flame." His eyes flicked up. "Is it meant to burn?" "No," she said softly. "Just to warm." The silence between them thickened. But this time, it didn't hold distance. It held promise. Martins had never flirted. Not really. He knew seduction, sure. Knew how to command a room, wear a suit, deliver a speech that made investors weep. But none of that applied here. She didn't care about his title. his balance sheet, his image. He had nothing to offer her except truth. So he tried. I don't usually speak to people when they're cleaning. I noticed. He gave the faintest smile. I don't know how to be around people who don't want something from me, he admitted. Maybe I do want something, she said. His pulse jumped. What? To be seen, not measured. Her words hung in the air like incense. Martins exhaled. You are. She stared at him a second longer, then returned to her folding, not to dismiss him, but to give him space to decide what to do next. He didn't leave. He sat down again, watched her finish, let the quiet rise again between them, this time without walls. Downstairs, Dominic Beaumont received an update from Martin's assistant. He's missing calls again? Yes. Same time every week? Yes. Dominic narrowed his eyes. Who's on his floor during those hours? The maid, the assistant said. Dominic didn't need more information. He'd seen it before. A Delacroix distracted by emotion was a Delacroix at risk. Back in the penthouse, Martins watched Paisley pack up her supplies. Why do you always whisper to the plants? He asked. She smiled faintly. Because they're listening. He raised an eyebrow. You think that matters? He asked. I think we all grow better when spoken to gently. He didn't answer, but he thought about that all night. And the next day, and the one after. That evening, he couldn't concentrate. Not on reports, not on numbers. He kept replaying her words. I think we all grow better when spoken to gently. He had built his empire on discipline, aggression, strategy. No softness, no patience. And yet she had said something that made his foundation tremble. He stood in front of the piano, stared at the keys, then pressed one. Just one. A soft note rang out into the suite. For the first time in 4 years, the 6th time she came, Paisley brought silence with her, not the kind that filled the penthouse normally, but a different kind. A softer one, the kind that waits, that listens, that stays without demand. She didn't speak when she entered. Martins didn't either. But they saw each other, really saw each other. He was already in the lounge, no tie today, sleeves rolled. A subtle change. But to her, it felt monumental. She smiled gently. I've already cleaned the atrium, just here for the suite. I know, he said. I asked them not to assign anyone else. That made her stop mid-step. You asked? He nodded. I don't like strangers in my space. Paisley exhaled through her nose, something like amusement hidden beneath it. I'm not a stranger? She asked. He paused. Then, you never were? She returned to her routine, but her rhythm changed. Not rushed, not flustered, just aware. Aware of the eyes that followed her every move. Aware of the heartbeat that matched hers in the room. Martin sat on the sofa as she began changing the sheets on his bed. He'd never let anyone do it while he was present. But now, he watched. Not to evaluate. Not to correct. To witness. Her fingers moved with purpose, smoothing the fabric like it held memory. Every corner tucked with precision. Every layer laid like it meant something. Why do you do that? He asked. She looked up. Do what? Touch things like they have feelings. Paisley paused, standing at the foot of the bed. Because they carry energy. The way you treat objects is often how you treat people. He tilted his head. So I've been cold. She didn't answer. He already knew. She reached for the pillows, fluffed them, turned them once, then placed them side by side. He stood and moved toward her. Show me, he said. Show you what? How to do it. The right way. She hesitated. It's not about the shape. I know, he said quietly. But I want to try. She offered him a pillow. Hands first, she said. Flat, gentle pressure. He mirrored her. Now push the air out lightly. Don't force it. He followed, focused. Their fingers brushed. Neither pulled back. He finished. Looked at her for approval. She nodded. Not bad, she said. He smiled, genuinely this time. High praise from you. Their hands lingered on the pillow between them. Paisley's voice dropped. Most people rush through the things that matter. He heard the meaning beneath the words. He didn't respond, but he didn't move away either. Later, as she wiped the bathroom mirrors, Martins leaned against the doorway, arms folded. You don't hesitate in here, he said. She looked at him through the reflection. Why would I? Most people do. Because they're afraid of seeing themselves? Because they're afraid I might be watching. She turned, meeting his gaze directly. Are you? I am. Her chest rose once, then again. I see things too, she said. His eyes narrowed. What things? You, she said softly. Behind all of this. She gestured around them. The marble, the art, the silence. You're not as untouchable as you want to be. His jaw tensed. But he didn't deny it. Instead, he said, what if I want to be touched? Paisley's breath caught. Then she turned away, calmly finishing the last streak on the glass. You don't start there, she said. He stepped forward. Where do you start? She looked over her shoulder. With trust. The suite was nearly finished when she finally packed up her cart. Martin stood by the window, back turned to her, hands clasped behind him. The city lights flickered below, but he wasn't looking at them. He was listening for the sound of her wheels. She rolled past him. Paused. You folded the sheets differently today, he said again, his voice low. She smiled without turning. Did you like it? I always do. She didn't reply, just kept moving. But her heart was thundering. And so was his. That night, he didn't touch a single document. He didn't answer emails. He sat at the piano and played a broken melody, something improvised, something unpolished, but real. And as the notes echoed off the glass, he imagined her standing in the doorway, hands on her cart, watching him. Not because he was powerful, but because he was learning how to feel. And for the first time, that was enough. Martins had sat across from royalty, shaken hands with world leaders, and closed billion-dollar deals under pressure. But nothing, absolutely nothing, unnerved him like the sight of her. In his space, moving with quiet grace, never asking, never chasing, just existing, and being unforgettable in the process. It wasn't her beauty, though she had it. It wasn't her scent, though he knew it now. Lemongrass always. It was something deeper. She didn't flinch in his presence. That alone set her apart. The others always did. They fawned. They stumbled. They smiled too much. Their voices got higher, sweeter, more desperate the closer they got to his proximity. But not Paisley. Paisley never asked him a single personal question. She never commented on his wealth, his power, his position. She didn't look at him like a man to be conquered. She looked at him like a man to be understood. And that terrified him, because no one had ever tried to understand Martins Delacroix. He found himself anticipating her shifts, planning his week around her presence. He began taking notes on her habits, mentally of course, never in writing. She liked to line the towels in ascending order of size. She refilled the diffuser oils 2/3 full, but never to the top. She cleaned in silence, except when she thought she was alone. Then she hummed, always the same gentle melody. And she always whispered something to the plants. He never asked what. He didn't want to interrupt the ritual, but every time she did it, his suite felt lighter, more alive, more like a home than a museum. One morning, she left behind a small folded note on the edge of the sink. He found it while brushing his teeth. You may not speak to the plants, but they listen to you anyway. He stared at the words for nearly 10 minutes, not because he didn't understand them, but because he did, too well. Downstairs, Paisley sat in the break room stirring her tea. Maria walked in, narrowed her eyes, and leaned against the counter. Heard he's staring at you now. Paisley didn't look up. He notices things, yeah, like how to replace people. Paisley sighed. I'm not replacing anyone. Maria crossed her arms. Then what are you doing? Paisley finally met her gaze. Something no one else ever bothered to try. Maria scoffed. And what's that? Seeing him. Martin stood at his boardroom window, staring at a digital projection of quarterly numbers. He didn't see a single digit. His mind was on her hands, her eyes, her stillness. He wondered what it would be like to wake up with her beside him. Not in lust, but in peace. The kind of peace he didn't know he craved until she stepped into his world and rearranged it, not with force, but with presence. He didn't know how to name the feeling growing in him. It wasn't obsession. He'd seen men obsessed. This was softer, more dangerous. He wasn't fixated on possessing her. He wanted to be worthy of being in her light. That afternoon, she returned with fresh eucalyptus for the diffuser and a new towel fold, this time a simple circle. No tricks, Just softness. He approached her as she wiped the spa counter. "Is this your dream?" he asked. She paused, then looked at him. "This?" He nodded. She shook her head. "It's my season." He tilted his head. "What does that mean?" "It's the place I grow from, not the place I stay." Martin stood silent for a long moment. "Then, what would you stay for?" Paisley held his gaze. "Something that feels like sunlight." He stepped closer. "Do I?" "You're getting warmer," she said softly, then returned to her work. That evening, he wrote in his journal, for the first time in over a decade. "She's not in a hurry to be seen, and yet I can't stop looking." He closed the book, heart heavier than usual, but not from burden, from something that looked a lot like hope. The next morning, she didn't bring a towel creature. She brought a hand-wrapped bunch of dried herbs and placed it discreetly near the spa diffuser. She didn't explain. He didn't ask. But the smell lingered longer than anything else ever had. And that's when he realized she wasn't just changing his routines. She was restoring him, and not with force, but with the quietest form of power he had ever encountered: care. The rain didn't whisper that night. It crashed. Manhattan disappeared behind silver sheets and rolling clouds. Thunder groaned like the sky had something to confess. Lightning slashed the horizon with raw electricity. And somewhere on the 72nd floor, Marthe Delacroix stood alone, staring into the storm through a wall of glass, his own reflection blurred by the downpour. He couldn't sleep. Not after what she said that morning. "You're getting warmer." Those words hadn't left his mind. Not once. It wasn't flirtation. It was invitation. Subtle, measured, but undeniable. And it terrified him more than any investor ever had. He stepped into the spa atrium, trying to calm the thrum in his chest. The air was thick with eucalyptus and heat. He inhaled deeply, then paused. The lanterns were flickering. Someone was here. He turned the corner. And there she was. Paisley stood under the curved arch of the spa roof, wiping condensation off the lanterns one by one. Her uniform was damp from the storm's drift. Her braid clung to her back. Water glistened on her arms. She didn't see him at first. She was humming, soft, barely audible, a sound he now associated with peace and longing. He didn't speak right away, just watched, until the wind pushed the doors open behind her and she turned sharply, eyes wide. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Delacroix." "Martins," he said, his voice lower than usual. She blinked. Right, Martins. That broke something in him. Hearing his name fall from her lips, not with obligation but recognition, made the ears inside him tremble. He took a step closer. "You shouldn't be up here in this storm," he said. "You shouldn't be either." He smiled slightly. "Touché." Paisley hesitated, glancing at the towels in her hand. "I was just finishing up. The lanterns were... Well, let them flicker." He cut in gently. "It's beautiful when things are imperfect." She stilled. So did the air. He took another step toward her. "I think about you," he said suddenly. Her brows lifted. "I don't know how to stop," he added, quieter this time. Paisley swallowed hard. The thunder rolled again, shaking the glass behind them. Her fingers clenched slightly around the towel. "I don't want to be another mistake," she said softly. "Another curiosity you'll forget when the silence returns." He shook his head. "You're not a curiosity." He stepped closer. Now, just a foot between them. "You fold towels like art," he said. She blinked. "You speak to plants like they're listening. You move through this world like you're blessing it." Her breath hitched. "You didn't ask for attention," he continued, "but you've had mine since the moment I saw you through the curtain." Lightning flashed, and in that brief moment of white light, he looked like something undone. Not the CEO, not the icon, just a man who'd waited 40 years to feel what he was feeling now. He raised his hand, slowly, paused, waiting for permission. She gave the smallest nod. His fingers brushed her cheek. She closed her eyes. "Your skin's warm," he whispered. "So is yours." He leaned in. And when their lips met, it wasn't polished. It wasn't practiced. It was hunger and hesitation, fire and fear. It was years of solitude crashing into one moment of surrender. His hands cupped her face, unsure but yearning. Her fingers slid over his wrists, anchoring him. The rain outside pounded harder. Inside they stood still, the world dissolving around them. When the kiss broke, neither of them moved away. They just stared, breathing, remembering, learning each other without words. "You're always in my space," he whispered, voice raw. "But it's never felt invaded." She touched his chest lightly. "Maybe that's because you've never let anyone in." He looked down at her. "I want to." Her fingers curled around his collar. "Then let me in." They didn't speak after that. Words would have ruined it. She took his hand and led him toward the suite's bedroom, their steps slow, reverent. The storm roared behind them. But inside, within those glass walls, only one thing mattered now. They were no longer alone. And they never would be again. The bedroom was dim, lit only by the muted glow of the city bleeding through the rain-slicked windows. Each flash of lightning painted the room in momentary silver, then left it darker than before. Paisley stood just inside the doorway. Martin stood behind her. Neither moved, not out of fear, but reverence. He had known many things: profit margins, corporate warfare, architectural design, global expansion. But he had never known this. Intimacy not wrapped in demand, touch without transaction, a connection so deep it didn't need to be earned, only embraced. He stepped forward slowly. She didn't flinch. His hands hovered near her waist, not assuming, not claiming. She reached back and guided them to rest gently against her sides. "Is this okay?" he asked, voice gravel soft. She nodded, her breath catching. "Tell me when to stop." "I will," she whispered. But she didn't. He moved as if he feared breaking her. She moved as if she'd been waiting for this moment since the first time. She saw him through the sheer curtain, shirtless, unaware, alone. Their lips met again. Softer this time, slower. It wasn't a kiss of urgency. It was one of permission, of unfolding. His fingers explored her arms first, tentative, unsure. She helped him find the places where touch felt like truth, where closeness didn't equal loss. "You're trembling," she murmured. "I've never done this," he admitted. Her breath caught again, but she didn't look away. "Then let me be the first." She took his hand and led him to the edge of the bed. He followed, not because he was weak, but because she was strong enough to hold the moment for them both. She began unbuttoning her shirt, one button at a time, letting him see her, not just skin, but soul. Martins didn't speak, didn't rush. He watched every movement like a sacred ritual. When she reached for him, he froze for just a second, then let her undress him too. Piece by piece, barrier by barrier, the sheets beneath him were soft, cool, untouched. Until now. He lay beside her, staring into her eyes as if looking for a map. "I don't know what to do," he said. She smiled, gently brushing his cheek. "You don't have to know. You just have to feel." And he did. Every gasp, every sigh, every tremble, every whispered name. He learned her not like a lesson to master, but like a story to cherish. He didn't take. He received. He didn't conquer. He connected. And when he finally moved within her, careful, slow, reverent, he felt something he hadn't expected: safety. Not just for her, for himself. Later, as they lay entangled, rain tapping gently against the glass, Martins rested his head against her shoulder. "I thought this would undo me," he confessed. Paisley stroked his hair. "Maybe it did." He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "And maybe that's okay," she added. He smiled. Not the polished, press-worthy grin the world knew, but the smile of a man who had finally been seen, held, loved, without performance, without pressure, just presence. They fell asleep that night without pretense. No one called for him. No one looked for her. The world continued below them, chaotic, relentless. But in the sky, within the quiet walls of a man who had waited 40 years to be touched, something new bloomed. Not lust, not confusion, but peace. And the kiss that began in the rain had rewritten everything. The morning after was still. The storm had passed. But in its wake, a softer silence remained. Not the lonely kind Martins was used to, but something gentler. Something shared. Paisley lay beside him, eyes open, watching the ceiling as light spilled across the floor in thin golden lines. He hadn't moved. Neither had she. Not because they were afraid, but because they finally felt what stillness was supposed to feel like: safe. Martins turned his head slowly toward her. "Did I do something wrong?" She looked at him, surprised. "No." Why would you think that? He exhaled. Because I've never done any of this before. Her features softened. I know. He blinked. How? You held your breath, she said. Men who've been here before don't hold their breath. He looked away, slightly embarrassed. I didn't want to mess it up. She reached out and touched his jaw. You didn't mess anything up, Martins. He stayed still under her touch. I've built empires, he whispered, negotiated hostile mergers, crushed competitors in a single quarter. But last night, he stopped. She waited. Last night, he said slowly, I was terrified. Paisley nodded. That's what makes it real. They rose quietly. She reached for her shirt. He handed it to her gently. No rush, no awkward scramble, only a kind of reverence, like they knew something sacred had passed between them, and they didn't want to smudge it with unnecessary noise. As she buttoned up, he stepped to the window, shirtless, hair tousled. She followed his gaze. The city below pulsed like a living thing. But the world inside this glass tower felt like its own planet now. Do you regret it? She asked suddenly. He turned to her. Not a second of it. But you're you, she said, voice quieter. And I'm me. I know. That difference matters. I know. She looked down. He crossed the room and lifted her chin. But I'd rather learn how to make it work, he said, than go another 40 years wondering what you smelled like after rain. Her lips twitched into the ghost of a smile. Lemongrass. I know, he said again, smiling. They didn't discuss what it meant. Not yet. But something unspoken passed between them. A promise, not in words, but in the way she touched his wrist before she left. In the way he kissed her temple at the door. In the way neither of them looked back, because looking back wasn't necessary anymore. They had crossed something, and it couldn't be undone. Downstairs, in the staff hallway, Paisley caught her breath before entering the service elevator. Maria stood near the lockers. She raised an eyebrow. Rough shift? Paisley didn't answer. She didn't need to. The glow on her face said enough. Maria scoffed, walked away, but Paisley didn't care anymore, because something had changed, and it was more than skin. It was soul. That night, Martins didn't work. He didn't open his laptop, didn't skim reports. He sat in the lounge, robe loosely tied, sipping tea and staring at nothing. Not out of exhaustion, but fulfillment. He replayed the night in his mind, not with lust but awe. How she guided his trembling hands. How she whispered when he hesitated. How she let him make mistakes and never laughed. How she became his first. And he realized he didn't just want her to be his first. He wanted her to be his always. 2 days passed. Martins had tried to act like nothing happened. Tried. He sat in meetings, nodded at analysts, reviewed floor plans for a new property in Dubai. But his mind wasn't on projected growth rates. It was on her. He could still feel the shape of her fingers on his chest, still hear the way she exhaled his name like it had never belonged to anyone else before. He was unraveling, but not in the way he feared. He wasn't losing himself. He was discovering what had been buried under years of steel and silence. And he wasn't about to let it go. Paisley returned for her next shift as scheduled. Same uniform, same shoes, same cart, but everything had changed. And she could feel it the moment she stepped off the elevator. He was waiting, not pretending to be busy, not hidden in shadows. Standing there, hands in his pockets, chest rising just slightly faster than usual. They didn't say anything. She walked in. He stepped forward, then stopped. Hi, he said. She smiled. Hi. It should have felt awkward, but it didn't. Not with him. Not now. I cleared the guest room, he said. The one near the sky garden. She tilted her head. Why? I had it remodeled. For who? He hesitated. Then, for you. Paisley blinked. You want me to live on the penthouse floor? I want you to have your own space, one that's yours, not where you work, not under me. She crossed her arms lightly. Sounds a lot like ownership. He stepped closer. It's not. Then what is it? Access, he said. Safety. Freedom. She held his gaze. You're not a maid anymore, Paisley, he said softly. You're more than that now. She took a moment to let it land, then nodded once. Okay, she said, but I still fold towels the way I like. His smile cracked wider. I wouldn't dare stop you. Later that evening, she opened the door to her new room. It wasn't huge, but it was perfect. Neutral tones, soft lighting, fresh eucalyptus by the bed, shelves left empty, waiting to be filled. A handwritten card sat on the nightstand. You changed my silence. This space is yours, not for what you do, but for who you are. M. She clutched the card to her chest. He hadn't written much, but it said everything. The staff began to whisper. Why does she have a private suite? She has keycard access to the executive lounge? Wasn't she just folding towels 2 months ago? Some speculated promotion. Some called it scandal. A few called her lucky, but Martins didn't care. He kissed her in the elevator now, pulled her close between floors. She'd giggle, blush, straighten her uniform when they stopped. He didn't care who saw. He kissed her against the elevator's gold paneling like the world could end mid-descent, and it would be enough. He invited her to his office once, during a quiet hour between back-to-back meetings. She walked in, towel still in hand, confused. You called for me? He nodded, then pulled her into his lap, paperweights flying. Martins. No one's here, he whispered, lips grazing her neck. She laughed. You have a quarterly review in 10 minutes. Then I'll make it count. He kissed her like he'd waited 10 years for 10 minutes, and she melted. Right there, on his lap, between columns of financial forecasts. That night, he walked her to her room. She paused at the door. You're spoiling me, she said. I waited 40 years, he replied. This isn't spoiling, this is catching up. She ran a hand down his shirt. And what happens if I leave one day? He went quiet. Then I'll still be grateful you ever arrived. She kissed him before he could say more. And that kiss didn't end until her knees hit the bed frame. Martins used to time his life down to the minute. Now he was late to nearly everything. Because of her. Because she'd walk past the spa doors and he'd forget the numbers on his spreadsheets. Because she'd whisper good morning outside his office and he'd lose interest in board memos. Because she'd laugh softly from across the penthouse hallway and the sound alone made his chest ache in a way no illness ever had. She wasn't a habit. She was a need. The elevator became their secret place. At first it was a kiss, innocent, stolen between floors. Then it was a pull, him dragging her in, pressing the emergency halt button, his mouth already on hers before the doors fully closed. She'd gasp. Someone could. They won't. He'd murmur against her neck, and they never did. His hand would stay on her waist, anchoring her to him, as if letting go might wake him from all of it. He started looking for excuses, meetings that never happened, errands only he could run, just so he could catch her passing through the lounge or walking barefoot from her suite to the spa garden. He once watched her adjust a diffuser for 3 minutes straight, didn't speak, just admired the way she moved. She caught him watching. What? She asked with a smirk. I'm trying to remember life before this. And I don't want to. One evening she brought him chamomile tea to his office. He was seated at his desk, sleeves rolled, collar loosened, hair slightly tousled from running his hands through it too many times. Long day? She asked. He nodded, without lifting his eyes from the laptop. 3 merger calls, 4 investor updates. My brain's tired. Your hands? She asked. He glanced up. Her tone wasn't innocent. She stepped closer, tea in hand, and set it down beside the keyboard. Then she walked around the desk, slipped onto his lap, and kissed him like the day had no more demands left. He groaned against her lips. You're distracting, he said, pulling her closer. You built an empire. You can survive me, she whispered. He stood, still holding her, and placed her on the desk like she was the only project worth finishing that night. She wrapped her legs around him, and his fingers found their rhythm, not on a keyboard, but on her spine. Afterward, she adjusted her blouse, breathless. He buttoned his shirt slowly, eyes never leaving her. I have a quarterly presentation in 20 minutes, he said. She grinned. You'll glow through it. He grabbed her wrist gently. Stay. She froze. Here? He nodded. Just be here. After. She touched his face, softly. Always. Downstairs, the whispers were louder now. She's in his office. She's using him. He's lost his edge. But Martins didn't respond. He let them whisper. Because for the first time in his life, what people said didn't matter. What mattered was the jasmine oil she'd left on his desk, the note by his bed that simply read, "Sleep isn't weakness, it's healing." The warm towel folded into a crescent moon on the edge of the bathtub. She wasn't seducing him. She was soothing something that had been bleeding for years. And that kind of intimacy? He'd choose it over influence every single time. That night, as they lay on the floor of the sky garden, stars blinking above the glass roof, he held her close and whispered, "Every moment with you feels like time forgot to run." She pressed her lips to his chest, and time once again obeyed her. Martins had always believed that love was a transaction. Give, take, control. That belief shattered every time she smiled without asking for anything in return. He didn't know how to exist in something that didn't demand power to survive. But with Paisley, he wasn't in charge. And he didn't want to be. He just wanted her near. It started subtly. He began referring to her in conversations. "I'll have lunch after Paisley's finished her garden walk. Reschedule a briefing. I have an early tea with her. Send the executive access badge to her room." At first, his team said nothing. Then they started wondering. When he walked her through the private wing during a wine tasting with investors, they noticed. When he let her sit beside him during a product design meeting, they whispered. But Martins only saw her. Everyone else blurred. One night, while they were tangled in the sheets of the room she no longer called temporary, Martins kissed her shoulder and said, "You're mine." She turned slowly, not angry, but clear. "You can't own people, Martins." He sat up slightly. "I didn't mean it like that." "I know, but I want you to stay. I'm here." He swallowed. "And if one day you want to leave, I'll still have been yours." He furrowed his brow. "So, what are we?" She leaned in, pressing her lips to his. "Two whole people," she whispered, "choosing every day to be one." He exhaled like he'd been holding that breath for 40 years. The next morning, he invited her to the executive lounge during breakfast service. She entered in her gray uniform, not because she had to, but because she still hadn't replaced it. His executive team was already seated. They glanced at her. Martins stood, extended his hand, and said clearly, "She'll be joining us." A long pause, then quiet compliance. She sat. He placed his hand gently on her knee under the table, not as a claim, as an anchor. She sipped her tea like she belonged there, because she did. Later that week, while reviewing the lobby design for a Delacroix location in Tokyo, Martins turned to her and said, "What do you think?" Paisley blinked. "You want my opinion? I value your sense of balance. You make things feel livable." She leaned over the tablet, pointed at the layout. "Shift the fountain. It doesn't center the space. And this floral arrangement, too forced. Go with potted basil, alive, grounding." He looked up at her. That same fire in her eyes, that unapologetic clarity. He'd built his image to be impenetrable, and she saw straight through it. She didn't just warm his empire, she softened its edges, and somehow made it stronger. That evening, he walked her to the rooftop. The city glowed below. She stood beside him, barefoot, arms folded, wind curling her braid around her collarbone. "I used to think peace was silence," he said. "And now, it's you." She didn't respond, just leaned into him. And for once, he didn't try to define anything. He let it be. Her, them, now. No titles, no signatures, just presence. Downstairs, the hotel buzzed with speculation. Some said she had bewitched him. Others called it scandal. But the truth was much simpler. He wasn't obsessed with owning her. He was humbled by being chosen, over and over again, by the woman who folded towels like love letters, and stayed not because he asked, but because he listened. Paisley had never been late. Not with work, not with classes, not with life, and certainly not with her cycle. So when the day passed, she thought it was stress. When the second day passed, she counted backward 3 times just to be sure. By day 4, her chest tightened every time she looked at her reflection. And by day 5, she bought the test. She didn't tell Martins. Not yet. He was in meetings, in calls, in spaces where CEOs talked about legacy and equity, not cradles and diapers. She took the test alone in her bathroom. The window was foggy, the floor cold beneath her feet. Her fingers trembled as she waited. And when the second pink line appeared, She dropped to her knees, not because she didn't want it, but because she never imagined it would come like this. Martins was pouring tea when he heard the knock. Not on the suite door, on the guest room door. Her room. He opened it immediately. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, still in her cleaning shoes, her eyes wide, hands clenched around a piece of paper. He stepped in quickly. What happened? She didn't speak at first. She handed him the test, folded into a clean towel. His brow furrowed. Then he opened it. One look, one line, then a second. His breath left him. I'm pregnant, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He stared at the test, then at her. She expected silence, or panic, maybe even regret. But he stepped forward, sat beside her and asked, Are you okay? Her lips parted. That wasn't what she thought he'd say. I don't know, she replied honestly. I feel everything at once. He nodded slowly. So do I. Then he smiled, the kind that cracked through every controlled part of him. I've never been this excited in my entire life. She blinked. You're excited? He laughed, breathless, nervous, terrified. But yes, excited. Her shoulders shook as emotion broke free. He reached for her hand, cupped it in both of his. I'm not going anywhere, he said. Even if the press finds out, let them. Even if the board revolts, they can choke on it. She laughed, genuinely this time, and something about that sound made him feel more powerful than any corporate title ever had. They didn't rush into plans. They didn't run to doctors immediately. They sat. They breathed. They held each other, and in the quiet that followed the storm of discovery, Paisley laid her head on his chest and whispered, I'm scared. So am I, he replied, but I want to do this. With you, even if it's not perfect. Especially then. Hello, my wonderful love and Twilight family. I hope you're still with me on this emotional journey. If this part of the story touched you in any way, take a moment to show some love by hitting that like button. It helps more than you know. And don't just stop there. Drop your thoughts in the comment section below. I would love to hear what stood out for you, or what lessons you feel hidden between these lines. Your words not only inspire me, but they also connect us as one big family walking through these stories together. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and join our Love and Twilight family, because every story we share is more than entertainment. It's a heartbeat. Now, let's keep going deeper together. He sent an assistant out with a note. Cancel everything for today. And tomorrow. Possibly the next. Thank you. Then he shut his phone off for the first time in 10 years. He lay beside her, hand resting over her stomach, already imagining the future. Not boardrooms, not launches, but giggles, little feet across the marble, soft coos in the middle of the night. He was no longer the only heartbeat in the glass tower. And for the first time, that didn't frighten him. It grounded him. She fell asleep in his arms, and he stared at the ceiling for hours, replaying every second. The towels, the plants, the kiss in the rain, the first night they touched, the woman who saw through his walls. And now, this, a child, maybe two, he didn't know. But he would find out, and whatever came next, he knew one thing for sure. He'd never be alone in the sky again. The next morning, Paisley woke to the sound of birdsong outside the penthouse atrium. Martins wasn't beside her. She blinked sleep from her eyes and reached for the towel he always left on the chaise, but today it was missing. Instead, folded neatly on the edge of the dresser, was a long ivory robe, soft, new, and next to it, a note in his unmistakable handwriting. Dress warm. You have an appointment this morning. I'll be waiting. Her heart skipped. She wasn't used to being taken care of, especially not like this. She slipped into the robe and stepped into the hall, and there he was, fully dressed. Crisp shirt, navy slacks, tie slightly loose, holding 2 mugs of tea. He handed one to her, his fingers brushing hers. Lemongrass, no sugar. She looked up at him. You didn't sleep much, she said. I didn't want to. I didn't want to miss anything. She sipped quietly. He studied her. You still okay? I think so. Still scared? She nodded. So am I. He smiled. Let's be scared together, then. He arranged for a private visit with one of the top OBGYNs in Manhattan. No waiting rooms, no reporters. Just a quiet elevator, a security-cleared building, and a doctor who greeted them like old friends. Paisley clutched his hand the entire time. "I hate hospitals," she whispered. "I hate being helpless," he said. But he didn't let go. Not even once. The room was softly lit. A gentle hum buzzed from the monitor. Paisley lay back, belly exposed, fingers tight around Martin's wrist. "This'll feel a little cold," the technician warned. The gel touched her skin, then the wand, then ba-thump, ba-thump, a rhythm, strong, steady, alive. Paisley's eyes filled instantly. Martin's couldn't breathe. "That's ours?" he whispered. She nodded, unable to speak. Then the technician paused, frowned, pressed again. More gel, more movement, another rhythm, a second, distinct, separate. Paisley sat up. "Wait, what is that?" The technician smiled, eyes wide. "You're not hearing things." "What do you mean?" There's a second heartbeat, a pause, a silence. Then, twins. Paisley's mouth fell open. Martin staggered back into the chair behind him. The technician turned the screen to show two tiny flickering dots. 2 lives, 2 miracles, 2 futures blooming inside her. Martin stood, took 1 step forward, then sat again. Hard. "Are you okay?" Paisley asked, wide-eyed. He blinked. Then, with absolutely no warning, slumped sideways. The technician gasped. "Is he?" Paisley rushed over. "Martin's." He groaned. "I didn't faint." "You definitely did. I just sat faster than expected." She laughed, clutching his face, kissing his forehead. "Are you serious?" he mumbled. "Twins?" She nodded, wiping tears. He looked at the screen again, then back at her. "You're magic," he whispered. "No," she said, holding his hand to her stomach. "We are." The ride back was quiet, but it wasn't heavy. It was full. He held her hand the entire time, staring out at the city, then down, at her, then back at her stomach, like he still couldn't believe it. "I was ready for one," he said softly. "You weren't even ready for that," she teased. "Fair, but now you've got 2, Brett and Rhett," he said without thinking. She froze. "Names already?" He shrugged. "I've thought about this before. You've thought about being a dad?" He looked out the window. "Only in a version of life I never believed I'd get to live." She squeezed his hand tighter. "You're going to be a good one," she said. He didn't respond right away, just turned, kissed her fingers and said, "I'll be present. That's where it starts." That night, he built a fire in the penthouse lounge. She sat wrapped in his robe, sipping warm milk. He kneeled in front of her, hands on her knees. "No matter what anyone says," he whispered, "we're doing this." She looked down. "There'll be noise, accusations. Let them scream. There'll be judgment." He nodded, "And they'll choke on the truth." She smirked. "But we'll protect them," he said. "These babies, this love." Paisley reached for his face, stroked his cheek and whispered, "They already are protected." Martin's had always been in control, until now. Twins. The word echoed in his head like a secret too big to hold. He stood in the nursery to be, staring at 2 identical cribs he had ordered hours after the ultrasound. The staff hadn't even blinked when he asked for custom wood, hypoallergenic mattresses, and organic cotton everything. He paced the room as if walking its perimeter would make the reality settle faster. Paisley was in her suite, resting. He'd asked her to sleep. Promised he'd handle everything. He didn't know what everything meant. But for the first time, he wasn't afraid of learning. He was ready to fail, to try again, to do it with his whole chest and trembling hands. Because soon, 2 heartbeats would become 2 humans. And one man, who had waited 40 years to be touched, would finally be a father. Paisley woke to the smell of ginger tea and honey bread. She found him in the dining alcove, sleeves rolled, glasses on, surrounded by baby books and spreadsheets. "You made charts," she said, amused. "I need to understand feeding cycles, sleeping rhythms, and immune development. Within the first 3 years," he said without looking up. She walked to him, pulled the glasses off his face, and set them aside. "You're allowed to learn 1 day at a time." He looked up, eyes tired but soft. "I want to be ready." "You already are," she said, touching his chest. Your heart is... He closed his eyes. She was right. He didn't know how to bathe a newborn or change a diaper, but he knew how to stay. And that was enough to start. 2 days later, Martins called a press meeting. Not a formal one. No red carpet. No velvet ropes. Just him, standing in front of reporters in a charcoal sweater and slacks, holding a single-framed ultrasound photo. "This is love," he said plainly. Not leverage, not scandal, not gossip. A few gasps. One brave reporter raised a hand. "Mr. Delacroix, are you confirming the rumors?" "I'm confirming that I'm going to be a father." More gasps. Twins. Shutters clicked. He smiled, small and sure. "And I'm lucky beyond measure." He stepped away before they could ask another question. His silence did the rest. He returned upstairs to find Paisley watching the live stream from her phone. "You really said it," she whispered, eyes glassy. He walked to her, kneeled, pressed his forehead to her stomach. "I said it because I meant it." She ran her fingers through his hair. "They're going to be boys," he added. "You're sure?" "I know it." She laughed. "Then you name them." He looked up. "Brett," he said. "For strength." She nodded. "And Rhett," he said. "For peace." She blinked. "Strength and peace. They'll be different," Martin said, "but they'll always be whole." She bent and kissed his forehead. "And so will we." Weeks passed. The city moved fast below, but their world slowed down. He rearranged his life. Built a soundproof wing, installed blackout curtains and a white noise system, started eating dinner with her instead of reviewing market trends. His empire didn't crumble. It evolved, because now every decision began with, "Will this allow me to be home in time to hold them?" But at night they read to her belly. Martins would lie with his hand flat across her skin and whisper, "Hi, boys, it's your dad." Sometimes she'd cry. Sometimes he would, but always they stayed in the softness together. Brett would kick harder. Rhett would roll gently. And Martins learned the language of unborn sons, not through charts, but through love. One night, as thunder echoed faintly in the distance, Paisley turned to him in bed. "You're different now." He looked at her. "Scared?" "No." Clear. He kissed her knuckles. "I've never wanted anything this much," he said. She laid his hand over her belly again. "Then let's build everything from that." And they did. From 2 heartbeats to 2 names to 1 future. The day the ultrasound went public, the Delacroix boardroom exploded. It wasn't just about the photo. It was what it represented. Martins, the most private, most composed, most unshakable heir in the family's history, had declared not only love, but fatherhood, with a maid, to twins, and he did it without board clearance, without strategy, without spin, just honesty. It was the most radical thing he'd ever done, and the old guard didn't take it well. Dominic Beaumont, his godfather and the board's most influential member, called an emergency meeting. 11 executives in suits sat beneath chandeliers, eyebrows tight, mouths tighter. "This is reckless," Dominic said, voice smooth but sharp. "You know how the press is framing this?" Martins leaned back in his chair, calm. "I don't care how they're framing it." A murmur rippled around the table. "You've worked too hard to become this vulnerable," Dominic snapped. "This isn't just about image, it's about leverage. One headline like that and our valuation starts to slip." Martins didn't flinch. "Let it slip." Gasps. "Let it burn if it has to," he added. "If this company requires me to erase the woman carrying my sons to stay relevant, then it's not an empire I want to lead." "You'd give it all up for her?" "No," Martin said. "I'd give it all up for us." Someone coughed. Another cleared his throat. Dominic stared at him. "She's a chambermaid. She's the mother of my children. She's not your equal." Martin stood. "Then maybe I've outgrown all of you." Silence. "Let me be clear," he continued, voice calm but commanding. "This is not a negotiation. If anyone here attempts to isolate, discredit, or push her out in any way, I will sell my shares, liquidate my assets, and end every binding contract with my name on it. You'd walk away." In a heartbeat. Outside the boardroom, Paisley sat quietly on a bench, palms pressed to her belly, trying to breathe. She could hear muffled voices. Words like liability, publicity, loss, but none of them compared to the fear in her heart, fear that she was pulling him into something he couldn't return from. She had never asked for this, never asked to be part of a corporate war. All she had done was fold towels with intention, and fall in love with a man who looked untouchable until he wasn't. Martins exited the room. Their eyes met. She stood. He walked to her, placed his hands gently over hers on her belly. "They tried to make me choose," he said. Her eyes brimmed. He kissed her forehead. "I already had." By nightfall, the headlines began to shift. At first, Delacroix heiress expecting twins, mystery maid at center then, CEO defends love in defiant press statement. And finally, Martins Delacroix sacrifices legacy for family. He watched none of it. Instead, he held Paisley in the rooftop lounge, rubbing circles over her stomach as she breathed deeply through another wave of nausea. "You sure about this?" she whispered. "I'm sure about you. And if the world doesn't quiet down, then I'll make our world quieter." She smiled, weak but grateful. "You know what scares me the most?" she asked. "What?" "That you'll get tired of fighting." "I'm not fighting," he said, placing a kiss on her belly. "I'm protecting." The next morning, Martins walked into the Delacroix building with no security, no press manager, no shield. He held Paisley's hand, and the twins, though still hidden, walked with them. He didn't speak to reporters. He didn't give statements. He just lived, out loud. And the board? They didn't push again. Because power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply refuses to kneel. Martin stared out over the Manhattan skyline, one hand cradling a glass of water, the other resting on the ledge of the rooftop balcony. Below him, traffic buzzed, headlines swirled, and reporters waited like wolves. Behind him, in the suite where no woman had ever lived, she was humming. Soft, gentle, familiar. And for the first time, Martins didn't wonder what it would cost. He only wondered how much more he was willing to let go of to protect it. The fallout came quickly. 2 strategic partners paused negotiations. One investor threatened to pull funding. A longtime publicist released a statement subtly distancing herself from personal decisions made outside the best interest of legacy. Dominic Beaumont called again. "You have to play this smarter, Martins." "I'm not playing anymore," Martins said calmly. "This isn't just about you. It's the brand, the future, the shareholders." "I am the future," Martins cut in. "And I just decided love has a bigger return than approval. You're throwing everything away for a girl who folded your towels." "No," he replied, voice flat. "I'm investing in the only thing that ever made this tower feel like a home." Dominic scoffed. "You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking with my heart." The line went dead. Martins never called back. He didn't consult advisors, didn't call for damage control. Instead, he gathered his executive team in the Sky Lounge the following morning. No screens, no graphs, no staged smiles. Just a man and his conviction. "I'll say this once," he told them. "She's not leaving. Neither am I. Anyone who can't work in a company where the CEO chooses family over perception is free to submit their resignation today." Silence, not because they disagreed, but because for the first time, they didn't see a CEO. They saw a man willing to lose everything and somehow become more powerful in the process. No one resigned. They stayed, not out of fear, but loyalty. Because love that fearless, it's contagious. Back in her suite, Paisley watched the news in short bursts, never finishing a full segment. She didn't want to hear the judgment. Didn't want to see her name paired with insults like maid, trap, or accident. She looked down at her belly, the smallest curve now visible beneath her cotton robe. She whispered to it, "You are not a scandal," then stood and walked upstairs. Martins was on the floor of the nursery, sorting through packages. Crib pieces, diaper bags, a custom mobile with wooden stars and clouds. He looked up as she entered. "Hey," he said, brushing hair from his eyes. "You okay?" She nodded. "I need to ask you something. Anything. If it ever becomes too much, the press, the scrutiny, the rumors, would you tell me?" He rose and crossed the room. "Why?" "So I can step away." He blinked. "Not because I want to," she said quickly, "but because I would never let my presence be the reason you lose what you've built." He stared at her, then shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "No. I didn't fall in love with you because you were convenient. I fell because you were the only real thing in a world of glass and power plays. He touched her stomach. Losing the empire doesn't scare me anymore, he said. Losing this does. She pressed her forehead against his chest. I don't deserve you, she whispered. He held her tighter. No, he said. We deserve each other. Finally. That night, he posted a single image to his personal page. No caption, no filter, just him, shirtless, kneeling on the floor, his lips pressed gently to her growing belly. It broke the internet in 10 minutes. But more importantly, it made the empire human. Paisley never expected fame. Certainly not the kind that came with whispers in grocery stores and paparazzi photos while she shopped for prenatal vitamins. Her face was on the cover of magazines now, but never alone. Always with headlines like, Maid to Mother, the scandal of the Delacroix twins Cinderella or strategist, Empire's mistress, or future wife. She didn't read the articles. She didn't need to. The headlines were loud enough. Martins tried to shield her. He pulled her off the media grid, changed her phone number, reassigned the household staff to protect her peace. But the world didn't need doors to invade. It used opinions instead. Online comments became daggers. She opened her tablet one afternoon to order nursery paint. The browser suggested news links before she could type. She shouldn't have clicked. But she did. Expert Delacroix Maid may have used fertility timing to trap CEO Family Insider says Martins was lonely and vulnerable. Billionaire's reputation hangs in balance over unexpected pregnancy. She slammed it shut, breathed, held her stomach, then cried, not for herself, but for the little lives growing inside her who hadn't even been born and were already in a battlefield they never chose. Martins found her curled on the nursery rug hours later. Paisley. She shook her head, tears silently falling. He sat beside her, held her without question, let her sob until her voice was raw, then said, gently but firmly, We can disappear. She blinked. What? I have land in the Azores, a private island, no press, no noise, just us and the twins. You'd leave your life for me. I already did, he said. The rest is just paperwork. She laughed through her tears. But he meant it, and she knew it. Instead, they stayed, not out of defiance, but resilience. Paisley began attending therapy sessions online. She enrolled in prenatal yoga, started a private journal where she wrote letters to the twins. Dear Brett, your father reads baby books every night. He wants to be perfect. I hope you teach him that just being present is enough. Dear Rhett, you're the calmer one, I can feel it. Thank you for reminding me to breathe when the world screams. She read the letters aloud to Martins at night. He'd lie with his head on her stomach, eyes closed, listening to the woman, who had become his anchor, and the sons who had become his compass. Then came the Esquire profile. An editor Martins trusted, someone who had known his mother, approached him with a proposal. A feature piece. No angle, no spin, just truth. Martins agreed, but only if Paisley had final approval. It ran in October with the title, The Billionaire Who Chose Family First. It showed him differently, barefoot in his penthouse kitchen, flipping pancakes, cradling Paisley's hand as they toured a birthing center, laughing while assembling a stroller backwards. The photos went viral, not because he looked powerful, but because he looked happy, and in a world hungry for authenticity, that kind of joy sold better than any lie. Still, not everyone applauded. One morning, an anonymous envelope arrived. No note. Just a single blown-up photo of Paisley cleaning Martin's bedroom months ago, bent slightly, unaware, vulnerable. Across the top, written in red marker, she knew what she was doing. Martins went still, then furious. He tracked the sender. It led to a former board affiliate, bitter, irrelevant, and desperate for leverage. Martins didn't sue. He didn't threaten. He just paid a visit and made it clear that if even one more attempt was made to harm her peace, he'd dismantle legacies in silence and leave no signature behind. That night, he slipped into bed beside Paisley and whispered, They won't touch you again. She didn't ask how he knew. She just believed him. And in the quiet that followed, 2 hearts beat beneath her skin. Calm, safe, loved. The contractions hit harder than the doctors predicted. Paisley was only at 34 weeks. The nursery wasn't finished. The overnight bag wasn't zipped. Martins was in a board meeting, halfway through a heated discussion about European. Expansion, when his phone vibrated twice, the emergency signal they'd agreed on. He stood, didn't explain, just left. By the time he arrived at St. Clement's Medical Pavilion, Paisley was in a wheelchair, gripping the sides as nurses wheeled her toward labor and delivery. Too soon, she gasped. It's too soon. No, Martin said, running beside her. It's just their time. She looked at him through tears. I'm scared. He kissed her hand. Then let me be your courage. The room was bright. Too bright. The pain came in waves, relentless, burning. Martin's never left her side. He held her hand, brushed sweat from her forehead, whispered every word of encouragement he knew, and some he made up on the spot. You're strong. They're almost here. You're already their hero. They just want to meet you early. 12 hours passed. Then 3 more. The doctor finally gave the cue. Push. Paisley screamed. Raw, guttural, ancient. Like every woman before her who had dared to carry the future inside her body and bring it forth into the world. Martins held her hand until his knuckles went white. He didn't blink, didn't breathe. Then, a sound, sharp, fierce, beautiful. A baby's cry. First boy is out, the doctor said. He's crying strong. Paisley collapsed into sobs. Martins followed the sound to the nurse who held a tiny, wailing bundle in blue. Brett, he whispered. That's Brett. He reached out with shaking hands. The nurse smiled. Perfect APGAR score. Strong lungs. He's ready. Martins kissed the baby's forehead, eyes flooding. But before he could speak, second one's coming. Paisley cried out again, exhausted beyond reason. The second birth was quicker, quieter, too quiet. No cry, just stillness. Martins froze. Why isn't he crying? He asked. The doctor didn't answer. Nurses moved fast, voices low, movements exact. Paisley strained to lift her head. Rhett. They didn't bring him over. Instead, they gathered around a small table, working swiftly. A nurse counted aloud. Another tapped his tiny chest. A third inserted oxygen tubes. Martins couldn't move, couldn't think. He heard the beep of machines, felt the walls close in, until a small cough, then a cry, soft, raspy, but real. He dropped to his knees, not in prayer, not in defeat, but because his legs could no longer hold the weight of relief. Paisley wept, her body trembling from exertion, her heart torn between joy and fear. Martins moved to her side, holding Brett, and moments later, a nurse brought Rhett, wrapped tighter, face paler, but alive. They're okay, she whispered. He nodded, though his lips quivered. I almost lost one, but you didn't, she said, reaching for both babies. She pulled them close, one against each breast. Brett latched on instantly. Rhett nuzzled, slower, gentler. Paisley looked at Martins. I don't care if the world still calls me a maid, she said. I've never felt more royal. He kissed her forehead, cheeks, lips, and then kissed both boys. You're not a maid, he whispered. You're the reason they're here. Down the hall, the press waited. Martins ignored them. He stayed by her side the entire night, feeding, burping, rocking. He watched the rise and fall of their tiny chests, counting seconds between breaths like a man guarding treasure. And sometime near dawn, as Paisley finally dozed off, he cradled both boys in his arms, one in each, and whispered, I've built towers, broken records, ruled rooms filled with power. But this, he looked at their tiny fingers curled into his chest, this is the only thing that ever made me a man. The penthouse nursery had waited in silence. The sun dipped low beyond the skyline, casting warm amber streaks across the high glass windows. Inside the room, everything was ready, not by chance, but by love. The walls were painted in soft celestial tones, a gradient that faded from pale blue. At the base, to a delicate cream near the ceiling, dotted with tiny hand-painted stars. Above the cribs, a mobile hung, not store-bought, but carved by hand. Little wooden planets orbited a miniature moon. Martins had carved them late at night when anxiety wouldn't let him sleep. Now it spun slowly in the gentle breeze of a nearby vent. The nursery glowed, not just with light, but with presence, life, anticipation, warmth. Martins insisted on carrying the twins in himself. No staff, no cameras, No fanfare. Just him, Paisley, and the sound of 2 tiny heartbeats nestled beneath blankets. She walked slowly, her steps measured but graceful, leaning slightly on him as they entered. Her body was still healing, but her eyes held something unshakable. Martins led her to the nursing chair by the window. She sat, and the late afternoon light kissed her skin, highlighting the faint smile that formed as she looked around. "You remembered the stars," she whispered. "Every one you mentioned," he said. "Even the shooting one." She looked up, and there it was, a little silver streak, hand-painted, barely visible unless you were looking for it. She reached for his hand and squeezed. The twins slept soundly in their bassinets for the first time, one on each side of the room, facing each other. Brett, as always, stirred first. A small "co", then a stretch, then a wide yawn that made Paisley laugh under her breath. Martins walked over and picked him up gently. No one taught him how to do this. He just knew. The baby curled naturally into his chest, tiny head nestled beneath his chin. "This," he whispered, "is everything I didn't know I was missing." Later that evening, he surprised her. 2 large boxes leaned against the nursery wall. He pulled the first one close, then the second. "What are those?" Paisley asked. He didn't answer. He just opened the boxes. Inside were 2 elegant, solid wood cribs, unassembled. Paisley raised a brow. "Martins, we have 6 nannies on standby." "I know. 3 interior decorators." "Yep. And a professional crib builder." "Exactly." He rolled up his sleeves and got to work. For the next 2 hours he wrestled with screws, puzzled over instructions, cursed gently, under his breath, and laughed at himself every time a board ended up backward. Paisley watched, holding Rhett in her arms, Brett asleep beside her in a carrier. At one point she teased, "So, the empire builder can't follow a diagram?" He glanced back at her, grinning. "Diagrams don't cry at 3 a.m. These 2 will. That makes them more important." She melted. When the first crib was finally done, he didn't place it down immediately. He stood over it, hands pressed gently on the frame, silent. Then, softly, he said, "This was my father's design. I found the blueprints in his storage. He made something like this for me, once." Paisley's breath caught. Martins never spoke of his father. "Why this crib?" "Because he left too soon," he whispered. "But if these boys sleep in something he designed, then maybe a part of him will stay." She walked over slowly, Rhett still nestled in her arms. Together, they laid him gently in the first crib, then turned and did the same for Brett in the second. 2 boys, 2 legacies, 1 room, and a love built by hands, not headlines. The night fell completely. Outside, the city still roared, but inside their home, it was quiet, peaceful. Martins and Paisley lay side by side on the nursery floor, too full to sleep. They watched their sons breathe, listened to the soft rhythmic hush of the monitors, and let silence hold them. No more questions, no more fears, just this, their first night, as a family. The nursery lay in hush and glow. Night had deepened outside, wrapping the city in velvet, but inside their home the room remained a cocoon of light, lamps dimmed, walls breathing warmth, stars painted above flickering gently like old stories reborn. Paisley dozed lightly in the nursing chair, her chest rising and falling with the rhythm of maternal peace. Her robe draped over her shoulders, hair slightly tousled. She was the picture of what love looked like after labor, worn but radiant. Martins didn't want to blink, didn't want to miss a second of it. He stood at the center of the nursery between 2 cribs, their boys sleeping soundly, 1 on each side. Brett had curled up with 1 hand flopped over his chest. Rhett slept straighter, calmer, still catching up from the rougher birth. Martins looked from one to the other, then lowered himself to the floor, cross-legged, palms resting on his knees. He didn't speak for a long time, but his eyes said everything. These weren't just babies. They were living proof that his life could mean something beyond power or precision. He had acquired companies, conquered markets, chaired boards, dictated terms worth billions. But in this moment, none of those achievements held a candle to the miracle of watching his sons breathe. Their names weren't etched in stock charts. They were written in heartbeat and swaddled skin. He leaned closer to Rhett's crib. The boy stirred, lips puckering in a sleepy motion. "I don't know who you'll grow to be," Martins whispered, voice low, "but I promise you this. Whatever you are called to, whatever your passions, I will not be absent." He turned to Brett's crib. The little boy stretched slightly, making a soft coo before settling again. Martin smiled. "Every decision I've made in business was calculated, strategic, cold." He glanced toward Paisley. "But loving your mother wasn't calculated. It was instinct, like breathing." He stood, moved to the small writing desk in the corner of the room, opened the drawer, pulled out a leather-bound notebook. It was one he'd received as a congratulatory gift when he closed his biggest tech merger. He'd never written in it. Until now. He opened to the first page. The pen shook slightly in his hand, not from fear, but from the weight of truth. He began writing, "To my sons, if you ever find this, I want you to know that the night you came into the world, I became someone new. Not just a man with more responsibility, but a man with more purpose. Your mother gave me the gift of seeing life outside the office, beyond the empire. She made this home, and you two made me whole. I vow to never miss your first steps, your first words, your moments of confusion or wonder. I may lead thousands, but I will never forget that leading you, guiding you, is the highest calling I'll ever have." He signed it simply, "Dad," folded the page, tucked it in an envelope labeled, "Read this when you're father's," then placed it in the hidden drawer beneath Rhett's crib. Returning to the middle of the room, he watched both cradles again. Each held a soul he would die for, each one a piece of himself and of Paisley. He knelt, laid both palms flat on the floor between the cribs, and closed his eyes. He whispered 3 vows, not to God, not to the public, not to shareholders or board members, but to his sons. "I will be there when you cry, not just to dry your tears, but to understand them. I will teach you how to be men, not by domination, but by devotion. I will never let the world give you a fatherless story." Behind him, Paisley stirred. She rose slowly and walked over to where he knelt, placed her hand on his shoulder. He turned. She smiled down at him, eyes still heavy with sleep but lit with something sacred. "I heard you," she whispered. He stood and faced her fully, sliding both arms around her waist. "You weren't supposed to. I was always meant to." They stood there a long moment, foreheads touching. 2 people who had rewritten each other's destinies. Then together, they moved to the cribs, one hand on each rail. 2 parents, one promise. Outside, the city blinked and moved and roared. But in that room, time bowed in reverence, and fatherhood rose like a quiet crown on the head of a man reborn. The morning broke soft and golden. Above the city, nestled atop the tallest tower in Martin's hotel empire, the Sky Garden, bloomed in secret silence, a sanctuary untouched by the daily noise of business or media. Here, spring had come early. Orchids in blush pinks and soft lilacs hung like whispers from trellises. Ivy hugged the marble planters. The scent of jasmine drifted lightly with the breeze, and below them, the city blurred into irrelevance. Martins had spent months preparing this moment, not with extravagance, but with intention. Every flower was one Paisley had mentioned offhandedly. Every color had been tested in sunlight, viewed from every angle, to ensure it matched the tone of her skin when she smiled. Now she stood at the garden's center, barefoot on the smooth stone, in a soft wrap dress the color of dawn, holding Brett in one arm. Rhett swaddled and strapped to her chest. Martin stood a few feet away, watching. His heart was a heavy drum in his chest, not from nerves, but from reverence. Paisley turned slowly, taking in the place. She knew he was planning something, but not this. Not orchids wrapped around archways and private fountains arranged to echo lullabies. She walked to the edge of the terrace where glass railings offered a panoramic view of the skyline. Below, life continued as usual. But here time slowed. "Martins," she said softly, "this feels like another world." He stepped forward. "It is," he said, "one I built for just us." She turned to face him, brow tilted. "Us and 2 noisy babies?" He smiled, reaching out to gently cup Brett's tiny foot. "The best noise I've ever heard." She walked slowly into the heart of the garden. It was a circular space surrounded by low fountains. Martins had instructed they flowed gently, not with grandeur, but with rhythm, like a mother's heartbeat, like breathing. In the center was a stone platform, raised just slightly above the rest. Paisley stepped onto it, and when she turned again, Martins was no longer standing. He was kneeling. She froze, not from fear, but from the weight of it. He looked up at her, not as a billionaire, not as the CEO of a legacy hotel chain, but as a man who had finally come home. "Paisley," he began, voice low but steady. "Before you, I thought I understood value. I thought I understood what it meant to invest wisely. Build legacy, protect image." He paused. "But you—" His hand trembled slightly as he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "You taught me that the greatest investments aren't made in boardrooms. They're made in cradles, in kisses, in sacrifices no one sees but still change everything." Paisley's lips parted. Tears glistened. Rhett stirred softly against her chest. Martins opened the box. Inside lay a ring unlike any she'd ever seen, 2 thin golden vines twisting into each other, cradling a single emerald-cut diamond at the center. "No empire matters if you're not standing in it beside me," he said. "No crown means anything if it doesn't rest in a home we built together." Then he steadied his breath. "I want to be your husband, not just the father of your sons, not just the man who adores you, but the man who walks with you for all the days to come. Will you marry me?" Paisley's hands flew to her mouth, not because she was surprised, but because every cell in her body screamed yes, and she needed a breath to speak. Brett kicked in her arms. Rhett let out a tiny squeak of impatience. Paisley laughed, then nodded, then cried, then said it. "Yes, yes, Martins, forever." He stood quickly, sliding the ring onto her finger with a hand that trembled, and then he kissed her, deep, sure, and grateful, the kind of kiss that rewrote bloodlines. The babies nestled between them, and even they seemed to pause, held between 2 hearts learning how to beat as one. They sat together afterward on the low garden bench beneath the largest arch of orchids. Paisley leaned against his chest. Martins held one arm around her and the other balancing Brett, while Rhett slept softly in her sling. No cameras, no headlines, just them. The city below blurred, and love above bloomed, fresh and full of promise. Evening wrapped its arms around the sky garden. The city lights below shimmered like distant stars, but up here, everything felt still, sacred. Paisley's ring sparkled faintly beneath the soft ambient glow from the garden's hanging lanterns. She sat quietly beside Martins on the garden bench, her head on his shoulder, both babies now fast asleep against their chests. There were no violinists, no dramatic applause, only breath and honesty. Martins couldn't stop looking at her. "You said yes," he whispered, as if repeating it might make it more real. She looked up at him. "I did," he exhaled, smiling, but Paisley's gaze lingered. There was more behind it. "Martins," she began, her voice hushed but firm. He straightened slightly. "What is it?" She turned toward him completely now, both hands resting on the blanket that covered Brett's tiny legs. "I said yes because I love you," she began. "Because you are the father of my children. Because I see who you are beneath the suits, the strategies, and the towers." She reached for his hand, tracing a line down his palm with her thumb. "But I need you to understand something." He nodded. "I was never a prize to be won." Her words weren't sharp, but they sliced gently through the air like silk. "You didn't win me tonight," she continued. "You didn't conquer me. I was never a possession." Martin's eyes softened. "I never meant—" "I know," she interrupted, gently, "and that's why I'm telling you this. Because I know you're the kind of man who wants to love right, who wants to protect, not possess." She looked down at her sons, then back up at him. "You already have me. You've had me since the day you listened without interrupting, since you walked past my shame, my uniform, my brokenness, and saw the woman." Her eyes brimmed, but she didn't let the tears fall. "You don't need to keep proving yourself to me, not with rings, not with gardens, not with titles. Just keep being the man who kneels beside our sons' cribs, who chooses softness over control." Martins didn't speak for a while. He just stared at her, his throat thick with emotion. Then he reached out and placed his hand over hers, firm and warm. "I hear you," he said, "and I want you to know. You don't owe me anything, Paisley. Not a yes, not a ring, not even your forgiveness for the man I used to be." He paused. "You being here? Loving me freely. That's more than I deserve." A long silence followed, comfortable, full of weight and grace. Paisley leaned in and pressed her forehead to his, then whispered, "You don't have to earn my love. You only have to protect it." He nodded slowly, heart thudding against his ribs. "I will." Later that night, after their private chef had quietly delivered a warm dinner to the rooftop and left without fanfare, they sat cross-legged on the floor beside a low table beneath the trellises. Brett slept in a nearby cushioned bassinet, while Rhett curled softly in Paisley's lap. They ate with their hands, sharing roasted plantains, grilled shrimp, and jasmine rice. They laughed between bites, fed each other when the babies didn't demand attention, and relished every quiet minute of this new life they were now choosing, together. "You know," Martin said mid-bite, "for years I spent my nights building a legacy." Paisley looked up with a playful smirk. "And now?" He reached across and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Now I spend my nights building a home." She smiled. "Good, because legacies are built by men who forget to sleep. But homes are built by men who remember to stay." They ate until the food cooled and conversation turned into silent looks, the kind of looks that held promises, not pressure. And as the wind swept gently across the rooftop, Martins felt it deep in his chest. He didn't need to win anything tonight, because the woman sitting across from him had already chosen him, not for his empire, but for his heart. They could have booked the largest ballroom in the country. Martins owned half of them. They could have hired celebrity planners, flown in floral architects, or streamed it live to millions of subscribers. But that wasn't who they were, not anymore. Not after cribs had been hand-built and rings exchanged under lanterns instead of chandeliers. So when Martins asked where she'd like to be married, Paisley simply answered, "Where we started." And that's why, on a soft Sunday morning, the sky garden bloomed again, this time not for a proposal, but for a wedding. The air was thick with promise. White orchids lined the stone pathway, lavender and mint tucked into little bunches along the benches. No altar, no pews, just soft grass patches and wide space for barefoot feet. The clouds had threatened to break all morning, but neither of them cared. Not Paisley, who wore a sleeveless cream dress with delicate embroidery that shimmered only when kissed by the breeze. Her feet bare, anklet gifted by Martins from a local artisan wrapped gently around her left ankle. Not Martins, who wore a light gray linen shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, no tie in sight. His pants matched, comfortable, intentional. The guests were few, just those who mattered. The old chef who taught Paisley to bake with love, the midwife who whispered courage during Rhett's silent entrance, a few staff who had become family, and, of course, the twins, wrapped in soft cream-colored slings across both their parents' chests, their tiny heads dozing gently against heartbeat drums. There was no "you may now kiss the bride" moment from a priest. There was no violin quartet. There was only the wind, the laughter of a few guests, and the slow, unhurried way Martins took Paisley's hands in his and whispered, "Right here, right now, I choose you." Paisley's eyes shimmered. "No matter how high the empire grows," she replied, "your love is my only real estate." The officiant smiled. "Then by your hearts and your vows, I pronounce you husband and wife." They didn't cheer. They breathed. And then, rain. It started soft, a mist that felt more like grace than water. Someone rushed forward with an umbrella. Martins waved them away. "No cover," he said. "Let it bless us." Paisley tilted her head up, rain catching on her lashes like diamonds. The baby stirred, but didn't cry. Instead, Brett blinked, curious at the drops. Rhett yawned, unimpressed. Martins chuckled and pulled Paisley into his arms. "You know what this reminds me of?" he whispered. She looked up, face soaked and glowing. "What?" "Our first kiss, in the back hallway. When the fire alarm went off and you yelled at me." She laughed. "You deserved it. You still kiss me. You were lucky." He leaned down and kissed her again, slow, smiling, soaked. And as the rain picked up, a guest began to hum. Then another. And then someone brought out a small speaker and played an old jazz record Paisley once danced to in the kitchen. No first dance had been rehearsed, so they just danced, on stone slick with rain, barefoot, twins strapped to their chests. He led her in a slow circle, one hand behind her waist, the other supporting Brett's back. Paisley twirled with Rhett giggling against her heartbeat. And above them, the sky finally opened up in full celebration. Their guests joined too. Some kicked off shoes. Others grabbed hands. It wasn't a formal wedding. It was a memory in motion. And as they danced, dripping, radiant, free, Paisley whispered through a smile, "I wouldn't trade this for 1,000 diamonds." Martins touched his forehead to hers. You are the diamond. Hours later, soaked and barefoot, they stood at the garden's edge once again. The city blinked below them. But it wasn't their world anymore. This was a rooftop, 2 cribs, a lifetime sealed by rain instead of applause. Martins Wayne didn't enter the boardroom that morning as the empire's ruler. He entered as a man who had finally remembered his soul. Gone was the dark power suit. In its place, a soft cashmere sweater over a crisp white shirt, sleeves casually folded. The Rolex sat quietly in his drawer. He didn't need time to tell him who he was anymore. The board of directors, a dozen seasoned professionals seated around a polished, U-shaped table, turned in hushed surprise as he walked in holding a folded letter. He greeted each one, not with the firm transactional nod of leadership, but with a calm that could only be born from freedom. He stood at the head, took a breath, and placed the letter on the table. This, he said, voice steady, is my resignation. Gasps. Confused glances. A pen dropped. I'm stepping down, Martins continued, not in defeat, but in decision. A decision to honor the one role I never earned by title, only by love, father. The room froze. Martins didn't flinch. For years, I was addicted to building, expansion, acquisition, domination. Those were my fixations. But when my sons came into this world, and when the woman I love showed me a different way to measure success, something shifted. A pause. I don't need to run an empire to matter. I need to raise boys who know what gentleness feels like in a man's hands. One executive leaned forward. And the company? Martins smiled gently. I'm not burning the house. I'm handing over the keys to someone who has lived its foundation from the ground up. He turned to the presentation screen, clicked a remote, and Paisley's name appeared in elegant serif font. Paisley Wayne, CEO, Wellness Division. Murmurs filled the air. He waited. She's not just my wife, he said. She's the heartbeat of everything this company forgot. She turned linen closets into sanctuaries. She turned tired employees into humans again. And if we're going to survive the next chapter of this world, it's not just innovation we need, it's care. He looked around the room, and no one embodies that more than her. Later that afternoon, Martins stood in the same rooftop garden where he proposed. But now, in place of a wedding arch stood 2 high chairs and a picnic blanket. Brett giggled, chewing the corner of a cloth book. Rhett, always the quieter one, looked curiously at his father's now official letter of resignation that Paisley had pinned to the baby stroller with a magnetic clip. You really did it, Paisley said softly. Martins laid down beside her, one hand tucked under his head, the other tracing circles on her arm. I did, he said. And guess what? What? I don't miss it. Paisley turned her head. Not even the power. He kissed her temple. This is power. She smiled. They lay in silence for a while, just breathing, listening to the city hum beneath them. Then Martins sat up, looked over at the twins and said, I think I'll take them to the park tomorrow. Paisley blinked. Alone? Why not? He grinned. You'll be busy in your new office. Madam CEO. She laughed, covering her face. Stop it. He pulled her hands away. I'm serious. You earned it. You don't need my last name to run that division. You need your vision, and I've seen it. You see people, and you see me, she whispered. He nodded. Always. The next day, Martins did take Brett and Rhett to the park. He wore a carrier on his chest and a diaper bag over his shoulder. People stared, not because of his name, not because of his wealth, but because of the gentleness in his movements, because of the way he knelt to help a toddler pick up a fallen pacifier, because of the way he held Brett close when the sun got too harsh, because of the way he smiled at other fathers, not with superiority but with solidarity. He sat on the grass beneath a tree and whispered stories to Rhett while Brett napped. He didn't check emails. He didn't take calls. He just was. And for the first time in 4 decades, Martins Wayne was not building a kingdom. He was tending to it. 2 small kings, and 1 queen at home. The first tomato ripened in late spring. It was small, too small by supermarket standards, a little lopsided. Its red wasn't uniform, but to Martins Wayne, it was the most perfect thing he had ever grown. He plucked it gently, thumb brushing the smooth skin, and held it up to the sun like a man discovering treasure. Paisley, he called across the backyard. She stepped out of the nursery, Rhett on her hip, Brett toddling beside her, arms raised like he wanted to race the wind. Martins held the tomato aloft with mock grandeur. "Behold," he announced, "our firstborn vegetable." Paisley laughed. "I think that's a fruit, technically." He shrugged. "Tell that to the dirt under my nails." Brett reached for it, giggling. Martins squatted, held it just out of reach, then brought it to the boy's lips. Brett took a bite, juice dribbling down his chin. He smacked his lips, surprised by the tartness. Rhett, the observer, watched quietly. And then Martins whispered, "I think I'll plant bell peppers next." Their mornings weren't rushed anymore. They didn't wake to alarm clocks. They woke to baby babble, the soft pad of feet on hardwood floors, the smell of warm milk, followed by Martins's new favorite ritual, cooking breakfast with. Brett perched on the counter, whisking pancake batter like it was a CEO-level task. He'd narrate every step. "Now, we flip it. Carefully, because pancakes, like people, need gentleness when turning." Paisley would enter to find them mid-symphony, Martins humming a tune, Rhett chewing a measuring spoon. And instead of boardroom schedules, their calendar had highlights, like tummy time at noon and library puppet show on Thursdays. Afternoons were for dirt and discovery. Martins had turned a portion of the estate into a mini farm, raised garden beds, compost bins, even a chicken coop. He found therapy in soil. "I used to chase profits," he told Paisley once, his hands deep in mulch. "Now I chase worms." She watched him, sun on his skin, sweat beading on his forehead, shirt clinging to his back. He looked more alive than ever. He planted mint, thyme, rosemary. And when Rhett crawled into the herbs and came out smelling like a spice market, Martins just laughed and called it character development. Evenings were story time. Martins built a wooden bookshelf with his own hands, soft pine, sanded edges, alphabet-shaped bookends. He read aloud with expression, even giving each character its own voice. Paisley watched from the doorway one night as he read The Very Hungry Caterpillar for the 6th time. And then he was a beautiful butterfly. Brett clapped. Rhett yawned. Martins closed the book gently and kissed both boys on the forehead. Then, as he did every night, he whispered, "You are my proudest legacy." One weekend, they had a picnic in the garden. No staff, no planners. Just a blanket, some fresh fruit, and homemade sandwiches. Paisley fed the boys bits of soft cheese while Martins strummed a second-hand guitar he'd bought from a local artisan. He sang softly, off-key but full of heart. Paisley leaned into his shoulder. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The Empire?" She nodded. He shook his head. "I used to think I'd die if I wasn't building. But I was wrong. I just needed to plant something different." He looked down at the twins, Brett trying to shove a grape into Rhett's mouth. "They're my harvest now." That night, Paisley found him in the nursery. The boys were asleep. He was watching them, one hand resting on each crib railing, as if guarding a treasure. "I never told you," he said softly, "but the day I met you, I had just finalized a deal that made me more money than I could spend in 5 lifetimes." She stepped beside him, and I felt empty. He turned. "But when I saw you cleaning the guest hallway, when you looked at me like I wasn't a billionaire, but a man with dust on his shoes, something cracked open." She touched his cheek. "You were always more than your net worth, Martins. I didn't know that. Not until you showed me." He wrapped an arm around her waist, pulled her close. "This," he whispered, nodding toward the twin cribs, "is the only return on investment I care about now." The tomato vines continued to grow. So did the twins. So did the love. It wasn't grand or headline-worthy anymore. It was quiet, gentle, real. Martins Wayne, once a man who conquered towers, now taught his sons how to water plants without drowning the roots. And every time he looked at Paisley, he thanked whatever force had sent her into his world, not to polish his surfaces, but to dig deep beneath them. Martins stood by the window of the nursery, the one that overlooked the garden now teeming with basil, cherry tomatoes, and wild strawberries. Inside, Brett and Rhett were asleep in their cribs, hands curled like promises. Paisley sat in the rocker nearby, humming a tune he had never heard before. Something she said her mother used to sing when she was little. He didn't want to interrupt it. That soft lullaby had become a new kind of anthem in their home. He watched as the last of the sunset poured gold over the twins' faces. There had been boardrooms. There had been applause. There had been headlines. But nothing had ever felt like this. He turned to her. "Did you ever imagine this life?" Paisley gave a gentle laugh. "Not even in my dreams." He stepped forward, crouching beside her. You gave me something I couldn't buy, couldn't negotiate, couldn't dominate. Her brow lifted slightly. He pressed a kiss to her knee. You taught me how to surrender. Martins had once thought love was something you won. He'd chased it with flowers dipped in expense, with dates under chandeliers, with gifts that cost more than most earned in a year. But what Paisley showed him was different. Love didn't shout. It didn't beg for attention. It came quietly, barefoot in a cleaning uniform, wiping his mirrors. While unknowingly revealing his reflection for the first time, she didn't try to tame him. She simply stood still and let him choose her. And in choosing her, he found everything he never knew he was searching for. Weeks later, Martins took Rhett to the garden while Paisley napped with Brett. The sun was soft that afternoon. He placed Rhett on a blanket under the lemon tree and began weeding. You know, he said aloud, when I was younger, I thought success was the skyscraper, the suit, the silence in the penthouse. Rhett stared at a butterfly. But your mother changed that. She didn't need wealth to show worth. She didn't need status to teach strength. Martins reached over, picked up a clump of soil. This, he said, letting the dirt fall between his fingers, this is how love grows, when you stop trying to own it and start learning to nurture it. Rhett babbled something back, as if in agreement. Martins smiled. Exactly. Later that night, he read a story to the boys, one about a giant who lost all his power but gained a family. After he closed the book, he turned off the lamp and sat between the cribs. Paisley joined him moments later, handing him a mug of tea. They didn't say much, but their fingers intertwined, and silence, once a symbol of isolation, had become their favorite kind of intimacy. When dawn crept in, Martins walked to the garden once more. He placed a small wooden plaque by the tomato bed. Real love plants roots, not walls. He took a step back. The CEO in him, the man who once built empires with metal and might, now found joy in tiny seeds and sleeping babies. He whispered a quiet vow to the wind. Let my sons grow knowing that power is not control but compassion. Let them rise not in dominance, but in dignity. Let them know that the richest man isn't the one with the tallest building, but the one whose love builds homes within hearts. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever believed that love begins where power ends, we want to hear from you. Comment below. Real love plants roots, not walls. Let us know where you're watching from. Tell us what love has taught you. Like, share, and subscribe to Love and Twilights, where every story reminds us what truly matters, not fame, not fortune, but faith, family, and the courage to surrender. From skyscrapers to soft cribs, from corner offices to tomato gardens, from CEO to father. Thank you for joining us.